saw an aggressive deck win last week, and we're going to see Tom Ross with Boss Slide start off today here in Dallas. You're going to be playing against Lauren Cunning, playing a deck that you're probably familiar with.
Oh, yeah. The second best deck in Standard, easily. Esper
Okay.
Control. Obviously, Blue Eye Red's a slightly better favored there. But the reason why Esper is so good is that it gives you many, many, many different angles to win, okay? You have Elspeth, which is phenomenal. Makes this clears the ground. She's playing Osmodat, Aetherling, and Blood Baron, and Demon in the main. She has infinite different ways to win this game. So
she's got a lot of creatures, does Cunning. She's going to start for the Watery Grave, while Ross is going to start for the Foundry Street Denizen. And if you're Tom, this is the matchup that I think he wants to play against with this deck. He's a hyper-aggressive red deck. He's got 18 lands, 30 creatures, 12 spells, so he's looking to give the beatdowns early and often. He's going to play a Burning Tree Emissary, going to trigger the Denizen, assuming that will resolve, which it will not. So a Syncopate for 1 stops that, and only an attack for 1. So a pretty big Syncopate there.
oh, yeah, it's huge. And you're right. Tom wants to play Esper all day, every day, because honestly, I can be a little bit biased toward Esper, but I'm not going to beat around the bush. Esper gets mauled by this deck.
Yeah, pretty much almost any mono red strategy, as long as it's like pretty aggressive, not kind of mid-rangey devotion. Seems like it does just destroy Esper decks.
Yeah.
But that Syncopate was a pretty big deal, going to slow down the beatdowns. Here's an
It
Ass
was.
Zealot. There's a trigger for the Foundry Denizen, assuming this does resolve, and wouldn't be surprised to see Cunning have a removal spell here. Second Foundry Denizen comes in, trigger that one again, so an attack for 5, and Doomblade takes
Doomblade.
down the Zealot.
That's huge because, again, like you said, Lauren was on the play here. If it was the other way around,
Yeah.
Tom would be just taking this game away.
Yeah.
But being on the play with that Syncopate on a obvious two-creature coming down situation on turn 2 puts Lauren right back in the driver's seat here.
And now here's a card that you oftentimes don't find in Esper Control, and Desecration Demon coming down on turn number 4. And that's going to make things pretty difficult for Ross, because now he's got to try to fight through this 6/6 that's going to potentially grow.
Oh, yeah, this is bad news for Tom. But, it's funny. These red decks, you can't really count them out anymore. They have such reach. I have seen in one turn just 7, 8, 9 damage flying out of nowhere. So we'll see if he has any explosiveness left in it. It looks like he has 3 spells left, so it looks like it's definitely not over here.
He's going to start with Titan Strength. And Titan Strength is a card that we will certainly bring up on the camera, because that's a limited all-star.
It
we
is.
don't see that
It
one in
is.
Constructed very often. +3/+1 and Scry for just a single red mana. So kind of acting like a Lava Spike type card.
Yeah, it's definitely the Lava Spike role here. And obviously scrying when you're in an aggro deck is actually, I think it's a lot better than the control deck in a vacuum. Because that last spell you need to win is really, really important to get to, and Scry lets you get there.
Gorehouse Chainwalker Unleashed. Then a Fire Drinker Satyr comes into play. Demon Trigger goes on the stack. Ross will sacrifice the Satyr so he can push through a bunch of damage here. So we've got two red creatures came into play. So those denizens are going to be +2/+0 plus the Titan Strength. So we got an attack for 6. Looks like it's going to be around 9 points of damage right now.
Yep, and like right there, 9 points of damage coming right out of left field there. So again, Lauren's got a good amount of cards left in her hand, so I don't think she's too worried. But Esper doesn't really have any inherent ways to gain life game 1. She has Osmodat, she has Blood Baron, and then Revelation. But Revelation is very, very slow. So, she's pretty much at the life total that she's going to be at where she needs to stabilize here.
Hallowed Fountain going to come into play tapped, and I think it's time for another Desecration Demon. Really interesting about, with this card being in the main deck. How do you feel about Desecration Demon in the main deck of an Esper deck? I mean, this is basically a 4-mana, gigantic wall.
It's pretty good. I think it's obviously not the greatest against this deck, because you would rather have a 4-mana 6/6 defender against this deck.
Sure.
So against this deck, it's kind of rough because, as you saw the last turn, basically Lauren didn't do anything except for killed a random creature. It was almost like a Chainer's Edict on a summoning sick creature, where if she would have had, let's say, any kind of creature that didn't have that kind of disadvantage, she would be at a much higher life total. So we'll see. I don't think it's good here. Obviously, I think she's going to board these demons out. I wouldn't keep them. I think I would just rely on her 2 Blood Barons and 1 Osmodat, because not only do they gain life, they obviously don't have that huge drawback of being tapped.
Ross draws his card for the turn. It's a Rakdos Cackler. So that's going to come into play. It's Unleashed. 2 triggers from the Denizens. Going to sack both of those. Come across for 5 points of damage. Going to put Cunning down to 2.
All right, this is tough. This is, like we said, Lauren doesn't really have any way to gain life here besides a Revelation, and that would only be for 3. I think she's holding a couple land, too, and then 1 spell. I couldn't get the glimpse of that, but she is in trouble if Tom draws pretty much any spell here.
So another copy of Desecration Demon there in Cunning's hand. Also has an island, and I believe just 1 more land in her hand. So she is looking for a Revelation or a card like Blood Baron or Ozadat. Sitting at 2, you're probably wondering, all right, how many burn spells does Ross have in his red deck? You take a look here, 4 copies of Lightning Strike. And 1 off of the top.
Yeah.
So Tom Ross is going to win game number 1 here against Esper Control and Lauren Cunning with Boss Sly.
Yeah, I mean, it was it kind of get to that situation with this boss slide deck, these red decks, where if they're at 2 or 3, it's almost inevitability if Lauren doesn't hit a revelation immediately, because Tom's deck is down to pretty much every out in the book. An Ash Zealot would have done it. You could sack it, tap a couple demon. All he needed to do is get one creature in. So, how about the sideboard here? We're gonna have another Blood Baron from Esper coming in. We're gonna have an Essence Scatters, pretty good, right? I mean, it's obviously better than the Dissolves. You want to just counter creatures in this deck anyway. Supreme Verdicts are going to come in, another one to cap that off at 3. Detention Sphere. So just a bunch of removal in the sideboard, pretty standard.
Yeah, a couple copies of Last Breath over there as well. One card that's kind of interesting I want to ask you about, Ashiok Nightmare Weaver. It's kind of a little bit slower planeswalker, but there's a really high density of creatures in Ross's deck, and it might change the way he plays the game. Would you bring this in if you were the Esper player?
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm pretty much I don't want to say renowned. Let's just say a known enemy of Ashiok.
A hater.
A hater of Ashiok.
Haters gotta hate.
I'm an Ashiok hater, if you will. I think the card it's not a bad card, but it's definitely not a good card. It's kind of one of those where you play it on turn 3, Lauren's on the draw. By that time, if she didn't have a Doomblade on turn 2 or a removal spell, you're pretty much just dead. If you go land, Ashiok, if that's your series of plays, I think you're in trouble. I think every card after board needs to be either a removal spell. It could be like a Detention Sphere, even a Doomblade. Then you can win those games. If she goes like Doomblade, Detention Sphere, I feel like she'll have a chance. If she goes Doomblade, Ashiok, there's just so much damage flying her way, because it's going to be 2 turns till Ashiok even does anything. And, heaven forbid she misses on the mill 3, doesn't hit a creature. That's a 3rd turn she has to wait for Ashiok to do something. So it's like one of those cards where if it's good, then it's an average card. If it does what it's supposed to do. If it's bad, it's real bad. You're going to really feel the pain there. So.
All right, we'll take a look at Ross's sideboard here. He's got 2 copies of Seismic Stomp.
I don't even know what that does.
Yes. Most people probably do not. It's not going to come in this matchup, I will tell you that much. 3 copies of Trickery, 3 copies of Pink Eruption, 3 Shocks, 3 Skullcracks, and an Act of Treason. So we're almost certainly going to see the Skullcracks come in here, and then the one Act of Treason actually could come in because he's seen that Cunning does have copies of Desecration Demon, and that's a great trump to that card.
And he has to assume that she has Blood Baron, because every Esper deck has Blood Baron. So it's one of those cards where a lot of times Lauren can just slam a Blood Baron, and then red can't even attack through it. If you have that Act of Treason, then you're just, you're drooling when you see them slam that Blood Baron. You're like, all right, you're real dead. So
that is best case scenario.
Best case.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, this is exactly what Ross was talking about when he kind of designed this deck. If you guys haven't had the chance to read the article, again, it's on the select site on StarCityGames.com. And one of the things that he said, after he played in a PTQ, he lost in the top 4, and he was working on the deck for the IQ the next day. He ended up winning it with a previous version of this deck, but he was like, I think the hyper aggressive decks right now are really, really good. This is an extreme take on that, and again, this is the kind of deck he wants to be paired against. He wants to be paired against Esper Control or Revelation decks in general, and Mono Black Devotion, and that's what he's got in round 1.
Absolutely, and I don't know if it's thanks to Tom Ross, but thanks to people around him that have also worked on this deck. It's got a pretty big surge in Moto as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I play against that deck at least like every other round. Some kind of really super aggressive deck, either from the Boss Slide deck, or a lot of times I play against these White Weenie, Johnny aggro decks as well. I mean, I think it's the way to go. I think if you can't really like go halfway against these Esper decks. You can't play the mid-range game with them, because you don't have cards like Thrag Tusken Huntmaster and things that were very good in the mid-range decks against these Esper decks. Now the cards are a little bit slower, and either you play the super fast cards or you play these more control-y cards. But then, if you're playing those control-y cards, you might as well bite the bullet and throw some counterspells and some verdicts in there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he's really trying to go under before Cunning can actually ever do anything. That's the entire idea behind the deck, and if last week was any indication, that's a good strategy to have. Again, Lundqvist winning with Boros last weekend, but we also saw Thomas Pinnell making the top 8 with a mono-red strategy designed by Patrick Sullivan. We saw a lot of aggressive decks when we were in Los Angeles last weekend, and I expect that to hold true this weekend as well. And, this first round, obviously, we see Ross with his mono-red deck that he's a big fan of.
Yeah, and he's just loving it right now. Being up a game against his Esper deck is real big time here, because Game 3, when he's on the play, if he does go to Game 3, I just really dislike Esper's chances on the draw against these hyper-aggressive decks.
Likewise.
It's
the
really
temples, the Watery Graves, and the Hallowed Fountains, there's a chance you're going to have to pay 2 to 4 life for those lands, and, it's really tough when the mono-red decks are they're so aggressive.
Yeah.
Even though their cards, in a vacuum are pretty garbagey, I mean, they get the job done.
They do. There's a lot of 2-power 1-drops here, so, 12 at least, right?
Yeah, he's got I mean, you can basically
count
count.
the Denizen.
Yeah, you can count the Denizen as a 2-power 1-drop because it's going to be oftentimes Fire Drinker Satyr and Rakdos Cackler, and then he has Legion Loyalist too, which isn't fantastic in this matchup. But again, it is just another guy to get the ball rolling on turn 1 and get the pressure on.
You can really, I mean, I was waiting for a chance to interject with the Lingering Souls comment, but you can, you can really miss it. You miss it here. Like the Esper deck, if she had Lingering Souls, think about how ineffective these early drops would be. It's just such a great card back in the day to absorb damage, and now you can really feel the, you can feel it missing from the format.
Yeah, there's nothing really to kind of stop the beatdowns, as it were. You know, we've seen people just play straight blue-white as opposed to Esper and have cards like Yolk Docs and Precinct Captain and stuff like that, but Esper doesn't really, you know, they don't really have that. You know, you saw Guillaume Wafatapa play Soldier Soldier of the Pantheon at the Pro Tour. But even that card's difficult to have it come down on turn 1.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. If you're shocking yourself, you're almost defeating the purpose sometimes.
Hallowed Fountain to start here for Cunning. Ross is going to probably predictably play a 1-drop, and there is a Fire Drinker Satyr for him. So the pressure is already here.
Yep.
Cunning draws a Sphinx's Revelation for the turn. She's going to play a Godless Shrine untapped and go down to 18. So we'll probably see a removal spell here as she passes the turn back.
Yeah, the old bluffs don't really work like they used to here. So they'll shock myself.
Here is an Ashes Zealot from Ross. That's going to get Essence Scattered.
Okay.
So you had a feeling those were still going to be in and probably bring in the additional one. So going to come across for 2-0 Ross. And, you know, I think that's he's fine with that.
He's definitely fine with that. I mean, he basically got 2 damage in for that Essence Scatter. Oh, she misses her 3rd land drop.
Yeah, bad news there for Cunning. As Ross is going to play a Burning Tree Emissary, Syncopate for 1.
He has the 1 open.
Yeah, and he said, all right, I'm going to pay for that. Trigger, here's a Madcap Skills and a cross for 5.
Ooh. And I think Lauren maybe made a different choice of play there that I would have used that Syncopate early, turn 2. Because I saw a second Syncopate in her hand, too.
Sure.
So you want to save the Essence Scatters for later, and you want to use the Syncopates very early on while they actually do, something.
You see Ross is getting into the red zone very quickly, or activates the Fire Drinker Satyr. He's going to take 1, but he's going to come across for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points of damage.
Yeah, this is the game, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be it's an uphill climb here. I'm not really sure what Cunning can do to get out of this situation. Ross is going to play a Skull Crack. I think that's going to be a lethal one. She does have a Syncopate, so she will counter that.
Okay.
Untap and draw. Sitting at 3 life, however.
Yeah, Terminus short of winning here. Another card missing. So, yeah, Lauren, again, it's those tricky hands. She had 2 mana. She had Doom Blade. She had Syncopate. She had Essence Scatter. So it's not exactly the worst keep in the world. I mean, I probably would have kept it. I've kept way worse than that.
Sure.
So, but again, you really want to use that Syncopate early. The game might have been a little bit different. Probably still at a loss because she didn't hit those lands. When you Syncopate that 2-drop, then you get the Essence Scatter, the next Burning Tree Emissary, and then he's only hitting you for 2 instead of the 7 or whatever he hit him for with the Madcap skills. So.
Sure. Either way, Tom Ross is going to defeat Lauren Cunning 2-0. Boss Sly has 1 of potentially many over the course of this weekend. As again, I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of this deck moving forward. You mentioned that there's a lot of it on Magic Online right now. It is super cheap to build, somewhere around the cost of 20 tickets on Magic Online. I can only imagine how much it costs in real life. Probably around $20, if that. So I expect to see, as a budget option, it's certainly good. But as Tom said in his article, it's not just a budget deck. It's actually just a very competitive good deck.
Yeah. And again, with people playing Mono Black Devotion, this deck has to be happy to play against that as well because, again, the Black Devotion deck plays 4 Underworld Connections main, 4 Thoughtseize main, and the real only source of life gain, you really can't count the whip till later in the game,